Hey everyone, how's it going? Today we have a really great and important topic. We're talking about boundaries. So the idea of boundaries really builds upon some of the other things that we've talked about so far in this course. Talking about planning, setting, like knowing what you want, knowing where you're spending your time. And when you do those things first, it becomes easier to set your boundaries. So let's talk about what are boundaries. So boundaries is sort of you drawing this line in the sand of saying, this is what I do and what I don't do. This is how I spend my time and how I don't spend my time. This is what I'm willing to be flexible on and what I'm not willing to be flexible on. So I'd love to hear from you guys. How do you feel right now? If we did a check-in and I said, are you really great at keeping your boundaries? Whether that's on how you spend your time, both personally and or in your business. Let me know. I'd love to hear in the comments right now how you feel about your boundaries. So let's talk about this in a couple different ways. First, let's go to the personal. So we've got our personal time. And I think it's really important to set our boundaries around obviously what's important to us. So if physical activity or working out, I know a lot of people that making sure that they get a workout in is super important to them and it's a deal breaker. And for them, setting boundaries around when and how that happens is really important. It's just a non-negotiable. They don't just let someone else say, hey, can you do this for me at that time? And they might say, oh, like somebody with very loose boundaries might say, I suppose, and think, gosh, I was planning to go to yoga class at this certain time, but this other person needs me, so I'll do that. So that's an example of when you don't have very strong boundaries, you're willing to bend and flex for other people's needs. So in our businesses, we often do this as well. So depending on what our offerings are, what we serve. I remember when we owned a coffee roaster and cafe, we had a lot of people that would ask us to sell things for them. They'd come into us and say, hey, I make X. Could you sell it here? And at first, when we first owned this, I wasn't very clear in like who we were, what I did and didn't do. But I became much better years into that business. And I started having a clear boundary that we sold coffee and we sold things that supported our brand and or coffee. And every once in a while we made an exception for something in the community. This is not straight. And I found that having those boundaries was super powerful and I felt much more comfortable saying no to things. So if someone came in and was selling a bracelet, I was like, I'm really sorry, we just don't sell jewelry here. Hey Peggy, thanks for hopping on. I used to be terrible, I'm getting better, and being exhausted has really helped. So true. Energy is a great thing that helps you contain your boundaries. I've also changed what I thought next year would look like in my business and what I'm offering. That's huge. So energy, a lot of times constraints help us become much better about establishing our boundaries and then keeping them. Time constraints, financial constraints, energy constraints. There's a lot of things that go into our ability to set, to give to other people in whatever capacity that is, both personally and professionally. And that when we have some constraints on some of these different things, we're much better oftentimes about saying what we can and can't do. So in order to set better boundaries, like I was saying before, that like some of the foundational things we've talked about in time, and we're going to talk today about the time boundary, I really recommend that you get really clear on what you want to be spending your time on, okay? So the first thing you have to do to set a better boundary is say, well, what do I want to be, set a better boundary around your time, is say, what do I want to be spending my time on, okay? So we're going to bucket that into two things. There's the work, and then there's family, and then there's personal. That's three things. We'll do family and personal sort of, they're cousins. So in your work time, get really clear with, like when I was talking to a client recently and she was telling me about, she only has like 3 hours a day that she knows her son's in childcare. And she was just using that for whatever came up in work. But we talked about that boundary for her and saying, okay, if this is your guaranteed time that you know you can focus on your business, you really need to think through what's the most important thing that you need to do to focus with a big chunk of time. And then that things that you can do when you're maybe not as focused, or you're doing while he naps maybe, but it's not something you can depend on. That's when your time boundary, where you're really saying, this is what I do during this time and I don't bend on it. I maybe don't meet with clients this time, or maybe I don't do any social media during this time, even though it's important for your business. So that's one example. Another thing that I find is oftentimes just the boundary of expectation. So if we have a partner and we have our family and our business, sometimes we're hesitant to just ask our partner and say, can I have this as work time and then I will be fully present with my family? So I'm going to just really separate me trying to work while I'm with the kids rather than just try to get it all done. And if you can just create some boundaries around, I take these 2 hours at this certain time, my partner expects me to then be working, and that I have a really clear boundary that I'm not being the primary caregiver. And then in turn, I completely shut off business later and I become fully present with my family. And I know for business owners, that's really hard. Some people are good at it, but the majority that I talk to struggle with this. And I would encourage you to try to do that more and more. So the big thing I want you to think about with boundaries is, however your schedule is, whatever are the things that you find that you want to be doing and they aren't getting done, either in your personal life or your business, think about how you are setting those boundaries. And are you being clear to people and telling them what you do and don't do? I'll give you a couple other examples, because I know sometimes people, they're like, that sounds easy, but it's harder in reality. So for me, I don't do client meetings Mondays and Fridays, okay? Especially all of my ongoing clients that I coach regularly. I only do those meetings Tuesday through Thursday. So for me, it's a really nice boundary that I don't just take these ongoing meetings on these 2 other days, because those are the days that I am working on my business. I'm doing administrative stuff, I'm doing bookkeeping, I'm doing lots of different things, and that way I'm able to dig into some work rather than my day being disjointed by different meetings. So those other meetings, then I know that Tuesdays I have lots of different meetings. I meet with people for coffee, I'm meeting with potential clients, I'm meeting with current clients, and that's the expectation then for me on those days. So my boundaries are clear about when I'm trying to establish my work time, and then when I'm trying to that I'm willing to take meetings at different times. One of the other things that I do is I do a workout in the morning. So that is one of my boundaries as well, in the sense that my husband knows that I wake up before him and I go work out in the morning, because I don't do it in the evening. A, I don't like working out in the evening, but B, I also don't want to take that time away from my family. For me, now for other people, it works, and it works for their family. And that's the big thing with boundaries, is we're just finding what works for us and what works for our family. But I encourage you to think about the things that you feel like you're putting on the back burner, even though it's really important to you, at the expense of them getting done, and you're doing it to satisfy someone else's request or demand on your time. Those are probably the things you need to create better boundaries around. And so to create the better boundary, then think about, what is it that you want to get done, or that you want to have be why do you want something? Is it for your health? Is it for family time? I don't usually do much stuff on the weekend. So when people ask me to attend things or to host things on the weekend, it's rare. It does sometimes happen, don't get me wrong, but I try to be more guarded with my weekends because they're family time. So just think about, it's really easy then for me to tell someone, sorry, I don't do that. That's sort of my family time. People are like, oh, okay. I mean, they're not going to argue with me about it usually. So just think about those things. So set the reason, what's important to you, setting your priorities, and then setting some boundaries around it. We're going to talk about what it feels like to hold firm in that as well in one of the lessons. But I think the big thing is practicing gently saying no. So for those of you who have a hard time of saying no to people, so you're a people pleaser, I always recommend just coming up with a script of being like, oh, you know, I'm sorry that I can't do that, but it's just not in my wheelhouse because maybe, and you don't have to give them a reason, but some people like to, especially if they're just starting out on how to set those boundaries a little more firmly. So a lot of times I just have them by saying like, oh, you know, I'd love to, but it just won't work out for me. Most people don't push back. So that's all you have to say, like, oh, that sounds like a great idea, but that just doesn't work. Or like if somebody says, hey, can we meet this day? Don't think about it as it's the only day they could ever meet. Come back with them like, hey, actually that doesn't work for me. What about this time? So just putting your needs out there, asking for what we want. So many of us just are just saying yes to the other person because maybe there's time open in our schedule and we don't have something else. We don't think we have something else on it just because it's time for just us and nobody else is involved in that. But we do have something on our schedule. We're setting aside time for us to work on something, whether it's personal or family or business. So don't always let other people's needs creep into that. So your action step for today is to think about an area that you feel is being compromised because of what some people call leaky boundaries, or the fact that you intend to have your time spent a certain way and then it ends up going in different directions than you want. So I want you to think about that. And then I want you to tell me, and I want you to write these things in the comments if you will, and I want you to tell me, what are things that you can do to strengthen those boundaries? What are things that you could say no to feel like you're reclaiming your time and you're back in control of it? I have one client in the past that, I think I've mentioned this before, but she was giving away all of her time by volunteering for her child's school. And so we worked through her setting. She decided to take a really hard stance and saying, I'm not going to volunteer to be part of any of these committees for 90 days. And that was crazy. I didn't suggest that, but for her, all of a sudden she regained tons of time. And so when you're able to do that and regain that time again, it's really powerful. So I really encourage you to think about where your boundaries feel really soft and that you're giving away your time to other people. And then see what you can do to take those steps to start reclaiming that. Hey, Ashley, great to see you on. Start reclaiming that so that you feel like you're in control. And that if you choose at some point to give something away or to do something during a time that you typically do it, you feel like you're in control of it versus just constantly having other people poke holes in the things that you want. So I'd love for you to write those things down. Those are the action steps for today. And let me know what's going on, because I want to hear about how are you doing on setting boundaries? Where do you struggle? And we can have a great conversation about this. So hope you guys have a great day. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.